Accused killer of CEO has been brought to New York from Pennsylvania.
Before Hanukkah and Christmas Day. Well, police say he brazenly gunned down a healthcare CEO on the streets of New York City, and now accused killer Luigi Mangione is facing federal murder charges. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. This afternoon, Luigi Mangione will appear in a federal courtroom in Manhattan. A federal indictment was just unsealed. Mangione now faces 4 counts of stalking, murder through the use of a firearm, and a firearms offense involving a silencer. Mangione landing in New York after waiving extradition from Pennsylvania, where he was arrested after days on the lam. Videos capture the 26-year-old's transport earlier today, first driven to an airport in Altoona before being loaded onto a small plane to New York, a swath of security in tow the entire time, and Mangione clad in shackles. The accused killer also facing first and second-degree murder charges in New York City related to that Midtown Manhattan killing of Brian Thompson during the early morning hours of December 4th. Sources now telling us that the expected federal charges that await could make Mangione eligible for the death penalty. Let's bring in our legal contributor and trial attorney, Brian Buckmeyer, by phone. So, Brian, I guess let's first start with Mangione's arraignment today. What can we expect?
Mangione is going to be doing an arraignment, which is an initial appearance before a criminal court, where he gets to hear the charges as you've outlined in the federal case, and then the judge will decide as to whether or not bail should be set. But considering the nature of the charges, I would assume that he would be denied bail and be remanded as the case then progresses. The next question would be is when and if he's going to show up in a Manhattan courthouse to then hear these state charges.
Got it. All right. So let's just talk about the state and federal charges here and the federal side of things and how that could make him, he could face the death penalty, right?
Absolutely. So in the state of New York, there is no death penalty. The highest charge of murder in the first degree, which he faces in state court, has a penalty of life without the possibility of parole. That's the highest sentence we have in the state. But in the federal court system, they do have the possibility of the death penalty. But we will know that far in advance of any type of trial because the government will have to make some sort of notification that they are seeking the death penalty. So while it is a possibility, we don't know if that's the actual sentence that the government will be seeking at this point in time.
All right, so Mangione's lawyer is now calling the federal charges a pile-on. We first knew about what he faced in state court, but now we're hearing about these federal charges. The lawyer's saying that it raises concerns of double jeopardy. Is he right?
So no, and I think currently Luigi Mangione's attorney is Karen Friedman Agnifilo. So I don't believe she's right in the sense of double jeopardy. Double jeopardy is when someone is tried for a case twice, not when they're charged for the same incident. We've seen cases like this when it comes to, for example, law enforcement officers that kill individuals being charged in both state and federal court. So that is possible, but I do share the sentiments, and I think most defense attorneys would, that it is somewhat of a pile-on, that where the state court has already secured an indictment for murder in the first degree, having the federal court then jump in as well to add additional charges would, in some senses, be considered a pile-on just because they already have such serious charges against this person.
Just as an attorney, and how this seems to be changing, by the day, what are your thoughts on just this whole process, how much attention it's getting, and now just the multiple charges that we are learning about?
So I think now that we're learning what the federal charges are, they differ greatly from that of the state court being murder, and there are specific defenses that come from that that I think Luigi Mangione might have been able to avail himself, especially because of this groundswell of people supporting him. We've seen high-profile cases in the past where it begs the question of hero or villain, and we've seen people divided. I would point to Daniel Penny as being the most recent one, of people being divided based on not necessarily the crime, but the situation that revolves revolves around it. Now we have the case of Luigi Mangione, and I don't even think it's much of a division. So much of that is people's frustration with the medical insurance industry bleeding into a homicide case where people are not necessarily looking at the facts of, did he plan the murder? Did he do it? Was it premeditated? They're looking at it as a point of, I'm frustrated with the medical industry, and they are championing Luigi Mangione to some extent. And I say that as an interesting aspect only because at some point, 12 people are going to have to sit and hear this case, and that could be somewhat of an influential factor in determining guilt or innocence.
Yeah, we should point out, as we do have this conversation, which is an important conversation to have, that he wasn't even covered by United Healthcare. And that was one of the surprises, Brian, that we learned as we continued to cover this story. By the way, we are looking at live pictures now. It really is fascinating as here we are talking about the groundswell of support for Mangione, and not, not over the crime, but the frustration with medical insurance. At the same time, look at the security, Brian, around him. I mean, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, almost a dozen members of law enforcement and federal officers all around him, giving him security as he enters the courtroom.
Yeah, and that's a lot. I've had my fair share of extradition cases where a client is either going to a different state or coming from a different state, and this amount of security is not normal. I think it really lends itself to the nature of this case and the high level of publicity that comes from it as well.
So let's talk about federal executions as we continue to stay on these live pictures. It's
only because at some point, 12 people are going to have to sit and hear this case, and that could be somewhat of an influential factor in determining guilt or innocence.
Yeah, we should point out, as we do have this conversation, which is an important conversation to have, that he wasn't even covered by United Healthcare. And that was one of the surprises, Brian, that we learned as we continued to cover this story. By the way, we are looking at live pictures now. It really is fascinating as here we are talking about the groundswell of support for Mangione, and not, not over the crime, but the frustration with medical insurance. At the same time, look at the security, Brian, around him. I mean, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, almost a dozen members of law enforcement and federal officers all around him, giving him security as he enters the courtroom.
Yeah, and that's a lot. I've had my fair share of extradition cases where a client is either going to a different state or coming from a different state, and this amount of security is not normal. I think it really lends itself to the nature of this case and the high level of publicity that comes from it as well.
So let's talk about federal executions as we continue to stay on these live pictures. It's interesting to note, by the way, when we remember when we first saw Mangione and how he was screaming at people as he was being taken into jail. When we first saw that he was caught and arrested, he's much more subdued, much calmer. The security around him, incredibly intense, from the NYPD to the FBI. They are all the armed guards now bringing him into that van. And the fact that it is created, as you said, just this this national conversation, not only around the crime and how he did it, but the fact that he wasn't even insured by United Healthcare. And a lot of people did not know that at first. And so that sort of pivoted the conversation away from all this concentration on Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, and just this overall discussion, like you said, about frustration within healthcare. But now bringing it down to what he faces, and that the federal charges open up the possibility of the death penalty. Federal executions are rare, right? There's only been, what, a dozen to 16 federal executions since the 70s, the early 70s, but 13 of those apparently under President Trump. So now he's coming into office. You have this story that's dominating the headlines. How likely would it be that Mangione could actually receive the penalty and that it be carried out?
I think it's very unlikely for a number of reasons. One, the stat that you're reciting out to our viewers about the number of people who actually do face the death penalty. Does the fact that Donald Trump, the president-elect, soon to be president of the United States, will be in office, and we did see a groundswell of executions during his presidency, have an impact on that? Absolutely. But also, I think if you look at it from a geographic standpoint as well, the Southern District of New York encompasses Manhattan, the Bronx, and geographically, if you're going further up north, up the Hudson River, it's still more of New York. And in New York, we don't have the death penalty. I think we have a stronger opposition to it. I think there have been a number of studies that show that people might theoretically believe and support in the death penalty, but when it comes down to being one of the 12 people to sign your name that someone will receive the death penalty, far more people are hesitant to do that than just to theoretically believe the death penalty should be imposed. And so I think there's a lesser chance of the death penalty being imposed, especially because of the nature of this case, but it's up to the 12 people that get selected, and we don't know who those people are as yet.
Got it. As we continue to follow these live pictures, just to bring you up to date, if you're just tuning in, Luigi Mangione just appearing in a federal courtroom in Manhattan. He just left. A federal indictment has been unsealed. He's now facing 4 counts of stalking, murder through the use of a firearm, and a firearms offense involving a silencer. He is now headed to state court. You saw the security there from the ground and the air. Not quite sure if that's a news chopper or if it's security. We're looking at earlier pictures now from when he was leaving Pennsylvania, where he was in jail after being on the lam for a number of days, and then extradited to New York to face these charges. Terry Austin, I want to bring you in as well, former trial attorney and legal analyst. Just listening to the conversation I was having with Brian there, your thoughts as an attorney, as a legal analyst who has covered so many murder cases with us. What do you think, why do you think there is so much interest in this case and in Luigi Mangione and in this conversation around medical insurance, the frustration with medical insurance, and just the groundswell of support that he is getting? And I should point out, not about the crime that was committed. We should never support murder, but just the frustration that has been brought out since Mangione allegedly committed this crime, and of course this so-called manifesto that he had written.
Exactly. This is the type of case I think that the society wants to see, and that the prosecutions, both on the federal side and the state side, they want to make sure that they're focused in on this. I think as far as communities are concerned, they are frustrated, and they are looking at the healthcare system as a failure here in the United States. But as you said, Kira, there is absolutely no excuse for murder here. And that's exactly what happened. It was someone who shot someone in the back, and it was someone who could have done other things. Louisiana is a smart person. Mangione, he is someone who has been educated. He is someone who really could have started a swell against the healthcare company, could have started a boycott, could have gotten many people behind him. And instead, he decided to take the law in his own hands. And we saw that Governor Hochul said, no, you cannot do this. The police commissioner said, we will not accept this in the state of New York. And so what you're seeing on the prosecutorial side is the firm backing of pursuing the maximum penalty, both on the state side and the federal side. What I haven't seen is the fact that both state and federal are doing this at the same time. And it does look as though the federal case is going to proceed before the state case, but he's being brought in front of both courts. So it's going to be interesting to see how, in fact, this is handled on both levels.
What do you think are some of the challenges for prosecutors in a high-profile case like this?
Well, certainly on the state side, if in fact they proceed with both that murder one, murder two charge, and they've tied in the terrorism to that, that's going to be difficult. This is an individual who shot another individual. It's not what we commonly think of as a terrorist act. But what the prosecution, what Bragg said he wanted to do is, look, this person was trying to make a statement. He had, as you said, a manifesto. He was trying to say something about large corporations and how unfair these large corporations are, particularly in the health industry. And so he's trying to make a statement. And I think on the state side, they will certainly pursue the social media that we saw, people coming out and supporting this defendant, when in fact he is someone who shot someone in cold blood. And I definitely think that the prosecution is going to look at what happened, and they're going to be able to at least try to tie in that terrorism, saying that it was intended to intimidate.
Terry, stay with me. New York Mayor Eric Adams and the police commissioner talking right now. We want to take our viewers live. All right, it looks like it just wrapped up. So folks, just let me know, anyone that was monitoring what was said there in the control room, if you could tell me what the mayor and the police commissioner had to say. Everything clearly, Terry, happening in real time here, everybody weighing in. I guess, as I think about it, the fact that police commissioner and the mayor holding this press conference, as we've been watching all these live pictures as Luigi Mangione goes from federal court to state court. Looking at the Menendez brothers in that case and how it became so politicized, and a lot of people lost sight of really the essence of that crime, and it became very political. What do you see happening here? As we're switching administrations, we've got President-elect Trump that was involved in so many cases, or various criminal cases here in New York City. We know Trump's feeling about the death penalty. America is really across the world paying so much attention to this case, Terry. The conversation and the frustration around medical care. There are so many pieces to this story, to this crime, and it's creating an international conversation.
It is, and you mentioned the fact that the Menendez brothers, and now we have Luigi Mangione, and we just had the Daniel Penny case. So many of these individuals are reacting to what is going on under those circumstances. Here, we see someone who is very upset with the health industry and large corporations in general. I think with the Daniel Penny case, you saw someone who was trying to protect other people. Did he go too far? The jury said no, he did not. And with the Menendez brothers, I think it was very political. And back then, they did not recognize the fact that the brothers might have been going through a difficult time because of the abuse that they experienced. I would say all in all, I do think that here in the United States, we need to take a look at the mental health system. Jordan Neely, for the Daniel Penny case, had mental health issues. The Menendez brothers, they clearly were undergoing some very difficult times in their life. Here, it's unclear yet, but we do think that there might be, based on what we've heard so far, a mental illness defense. There just might be that insanity defense. And if in fact he has medical issues, there are questions as to whether or not his parents recognize that. Did anyone else recognize that? Are we able as a community to come together and make sure that we are focusing on people who might just have some very serious mental illness? So it's raising this question, Kira, I think, of what we need to do, not just in the healthcare system once people are being treated, but certainly before it gets to the point where you're going to take this type of action like a murder that we just saw.
Brian, let's talk about the defense strategy here, a mental illness defense. Your thoughts?
So yeah, I've heard both arguments. When I say mental health defense, that's a larger umbrella that in New York has two, I think, distinct defenses. You have the insanity defense and what we call the extreme emotional disturbance. And in other states, they call it the heat of passion. I personally don't think that this would be an insanity defense based on what the definition of insanity is in New York. Insanity is when you cannot appreciate the outcome or the wrongfulness of your actions. So if Luigi Mangione thought to himself that in shooting Brian Thompson, he believed that he was going to cure the medical health care industry and not actually kill Brian Thompson. That could be a legitimate insanity defense, but I think from his writings, he very well understood what taking a gun and shooting an individual would be. However, if that defense doesn't work, I think extreme emotional disturbance does provide for a defense here where someone is in such a state of anger, frustration, or sadness that they cannot conform their actions or self-control that they then commit a crime. The example that we often get in law school is if you were to see a cheating spouse in the action and you committed a crime. You are so heated under the heat of passion you cannot control yourself. I don't think this is insanity. I think it's closer to extreme emotional disturbance, but I don't have the file, I don't know his medical records, and I've only know so much based on what's been reported.
Got it. Point well made. Well, apparently our Aaron Kontursky has a lot more details within that federal complaint. Aaron, tell us what you've been able to find out, including a number of personal notes written by Luigi Mangione.
We knew that the authorities had seized writings from Luigi Mangione, and they've been described to us. But now we see specific excerpts in this federal complaint that's just been unsealed here ahead of Mangione's expected appearance about an hour from now, Kira. If I may read, the complaint says these handwritten pages express hostility towards the health insurance industry and wealthy executives in particular. And we understand now why the authorities believe these notes amount to a confession, because there's one says the target is insurance because it checks every box. And this investor conference is a true windfall. And most importantly, the message becomes self-evident. So the authorities believe that these writings indicate Mangione was planning to target Brian Thompson, who was entering this investor conference. It's mentioned, according to the complaint, in his notebook. Later in the entry, the pages describe an intent to, quote, whack the CEO of one of the insurance companies at the investor conference. We now know that was Brian Thompson.
As we learn these additional details from the federal criminal complaint, and we've been following all the live pictures here as Mangione, Aaron moves from federal court to state court. Just kind of bring our viewers up to date right now if they're just tuning in about what happens next. And there you go. There's a familiar live picture that we are seeing here just outside state court. We'll remember that from President-elect Donald Trump when we covered that, and you as well, for weeks and weeks when he had to go before a judge. It is the same building that Luigi Mangione will be entering very soon.
Maybe, but first he's coming here to where I am now, Kira, to federal court and in Lower Manhattan. There seems to have been something of a change. And Mangione, though he is indicted in state court on 11 counts, including first-degree murder and furtherance of terrorism, he was transferred upon landing in Manhattan to federal custody and will make an initial appearance on federal charges here. So it's been an extraordinarily fast-moving day of developments. Luigi Mangione woke up at a state prison in Pennsylvania, was brought to court in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, near Altoona, waived extradition, and was whisked onto a plane that the NYPD was piloting. The plane landed on Long Island, and then he was taken by helicopter to the Wall Street landing zone, where he was greeted by the mayor and the police commissioner. I can't think of another criminal defendant in recent memory that received a personal welcome from the mayor of the city of New York upon arrival. He was then transferred into federal custody. He's now being processed at the FBI building, and he'll be brought here to federal court for his initial appearance on a 4-count criminal complaint charging him with stalking, with murder through the use of a firearm, and another firearm offense. The feds clearly want to send a message. Then perhaps he'll be charged and prosecuted on the state indictment.
Okay, so this is where I just appreciate you so much, Aaron, because it's been very hard to get details because things are happening so quickly. So there was a thought that he had already gone into federal court and was on his way to state court. So let me just back up for a second here. The pictures that we are looking at right now are from when he landed in New York, and as you said, greeted by the mayor and police commissioner, which, as you point out, extremely rare and unusual. And now this makes sense with just the swath of security here, Aaron, surrounded by the feds. So he's now en route to federal court where you are, where we have now learned about the federal indictment that was unsealed, and the fact that he faces these 4 counts of stalking, murder through the use of a firearm, and firearms offense involving a silencer. So he will enter that courtroom where you are, and then from there, move over to where we are seeing live pictures now at state court. Do I somewhat have that right? Or could that change?
All but it could all change, Kira. I would expect that following his appearance here at federal court, he is going to be remanded into federal custody and taken to MDC Brooklyn, the federal lockup where Sean Combs, among others, happens to be jailed right now. But whether he appears on the state charges, I think is very much in doubt. It's just not certain. It may reflect a bit of a turf war between the NYPD and the Manhattan DA's office and the federal authorities. But regardless, he is going to be in custody, as he has been since his arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania, on his way toward prosecution now for the murder of Brian Thompson.
Got it. Aaron, thank you so much. And Brian, if I still have you, just in light of now that we sort of understand the order of business, because it's been sort of, there's been a mix of information here about the live pictures and where he's heading and what's next and what's first, what was first, and just how this is all going to go down. Hearing from Aaron now on what the plan is, anything that you could add or context, and maybe just to the point of how unusual this may be, and just how things are moving so quickly to this point.
Unusual is an understatement. In my decade of practicing in the state of New York, specifically in New York City, being able to practice both in New York criminal court, Supreme Court, Brooklyn, all over, and also practicing in the Southern District of New York, where Luigi Mangione will be prosecuted, I've never seen things move this quickly. I've never seen a question of getting him from one state to court, seeing the feds jump in almost in front of the state court as they've already secured an indictment. And then, as I think Aaron appropriately said, this turf war between the two, everyone kind of wanting their piece of Luigi Mangione to try to secure a conviction. What likely will happen is the feds will likely go first, and the state charges will be at somewhat of a pause before some resolution is found, and then we'll kind of just see the next steps going forward. We'll see what evidence comes out and the difference of charges between state and federal prosecution.
Got it. All right. A lot more to come, clearly. Aaron, Terry, Brian, thank you so much. We'll continue to follow every moment of what is about to happen with Luigi Mangione as he is facing federal murder charges and on his way right now to that courtroom. We've learned about this federal indictment, exactly what was unsealed. We will talk more about what he faces, those charges, and what's next in this case. We'll be right back.
Thank you for sparing your precious time. This is Amir Shakil. Have a good life. Bye-bye.